I am very, never ever has this happened to me before, to filmed. It's very alien to me. So I've asked Mohammed if he doesn't mind if he films you but not me.
That's all he ever does.
Yeah.
It's okay.
You're much more, you're far better looking as well. But the second...
Opinions, eh?
The second thing, the second thing is that you will not be conscious of that because you do it all the time.
You will be.
I will be conscious of that. So that could impede or sort of affect fluency because of a certain nervousness
I understand.
surrounding a tripod in the corner.
It's amazing what a tripod can do with a little mechanism on it.
Is it filming now?
Yeah, it's on now.
Oh, it's okay. We not to worry.
But you let editorial.
Oh yes, absolutely.
So what I thought about us talking as a possibility was looking at minority communities and toleration. And in the history of Europe, toleration is a relatively new concept from the 17th or 18th centuries, and Christianity cannot in any way occupy a moral high ground in terms of toleration, because you only need to look at heretics in the medieval period, pogroms against Jews and things like that. But I think that what's happened with the retreat of Christianity, in a sense, from the public sphere, is that, within Western democracies, toleration is fundamental. It's one of the defining characteristics of a liberal democracy. Protection of minorities, and I just want to talk to you about the minorities within. I suppose there's kind of tolerance within Islam of external challenges, such as other religions, and then toleration within Islam of dissent and minority groups. So, for example, Christians living under in what we might loosely call Muslim lands, gay people, these sorts of things.
Yeah.
So the perception from that is filtered to us through the media is that Islam is intolerant and absolutist in its claims, and trucks no dissent or disagreement. I don't believe that to be true, but I would like to speak to you about that.
Interesting subject matter. But I'm so sorry. I need to ask you your name. Stephen, of course. If you think about it, Stephen, you touched on it just as we had started the conversation about perspectives. Yeah. One of the major issues is how certain things are banded together and collectively known as X. Now, in normal discourse, when I'm having conversations with people, and they say, in your religion, or are you religious? I usually will say to them, I do not subscribe to words like that. Belief, I do not subscribe to. Religion, the word, I do not subscribe to. The word religious, I do not subscribe to. Now, usually they say, oh, you can't do that. Yes? Do you belong to a religion? Now, when I say no, they say, you're lying. Or you're misleading us, or some other. I said, no, I'm not. If you take the time and ask me, wait a minute, why is your perspective a bit different? Yeah? Maybe I'll be able to explain to you. Whether you agree or not, well, that's entirely up to you thereafter. Okay? So, usually when we look at things, the first point of call I make is that Islam or any other, let's say Christianity or Judaism, right? Others, yes. First and foremost, we have to look at what it says about itself before we decide to interpret on what we think it may be. So, if Islam, its primary source is the Quran. Now, if the Quran is telling human beings, this is what this is, what Islam is, yeah, as opposed to what we think it ought to be, yeah, then the distinction can be made and a position can be justified. In other words, the Quran in chapter 5 says, this day have I perfected your way for you and chosen al-Islam for you. Now, what is a way, the word way, and what is the word religion? Are they the same thing? Or is there some overlap, but not entirely? Yeah? So, if we say, okay, the definition of religion is a belief in a set of X, Y, and Z, okay? And somebody comes along and says, right, I believe in the flying spaghetti monster, that's quite common, okay? And they make up a set of rules of how to live by them, would we call it a religion? Well, by definition, we would necessarily have to say that, okay? But the difference here, from my perspective, is this, that if Islam is a complete system as it claims, then necessarily whatever interaction we human beings are going to have in any sphere would have to have been addressed. Now, if it has been addressed, then there are potentially two ways or methods at approaching the subject matter. One is where you have got a literal understanding of something, a statement contained in the Quran, or an interpretational one. Yeah, both are valid. Yeah, if it is meant to be guidance for humanity to what we would call the end of the universe, yes, then by definition you are going to have areas which we would have to extract information from for our understanding. So, if I look at it from that perspective, then I know that if there is a state, then that state will be governed by a set of laws, rules, etc. Okay? That set of rules or laws would be addressed by a system. If it's a total system, then logic is dictating to me that from A to Z, things will have to be addressed. So a legal system, by definition, would be included in that. We have in the Western world, if we look at it carefully, we have this division between church and state. Sometimes there's an overlap, we know, but strictly speaking, guys, can you stay away? Yes, let us do what we need to do. Yeah, there is that. So we find there is a legal system. That legal system will determine how the people in that society that is governed by that system are going to interact with each other. Not only on a personal level, but also with the state. The approach we are looking at here in terms of the minorities and also about toleration, we would have to have a look at what the system primarily says, and then look at how scholars will have interpreted it depending on the circumstances that they were faced with.
The historical context.
Yeah, absolutely. Social context, cultural context, we would have to look at that. So, one of the interesting things is you went to a wedding. Did you say it was a Bengali wedding?
It was, yes.
Yeah. Now, were they Muslims? Yes, they were.
Yeah.
Now, if you take a Pakistani wedding, take a Gujarati wedding, Indian one, they're all Muslims. But you will see vast differences.
Yes.
But those are cultural influences that came in.
But there is something common though. They're all chaotic.
There is always chaos in order. Yeah? But it is true though. The fact is that they are cultural influences. Now the difference lies here as a last sentence. If you are permitted to do something, and the interpretation is this wide, then anything in between you are permitted to do.
But nothing.
Nothing beyond. Yeah, but those are very strict. The problem arises when certain groups of people who claim or profess to be X will say, no, it should not be this wide. It should only be this wide. Or it should be only this much. And the rest, sorry, you are committing an illegal act. That is where the problem arises.
When you talk about, you use the word system, what's implied in that is a comprehensive interrelationship between lots of different elements.
Absolutely.
And one of the, every human being finds meaning to their own lives.
Yes.
In the Greek philosophers talked about the good life and what was the end of life, what was the purpose of life, what constituted a good life. And one of my sort of little, as you were talking, Shabir, if the rules, as it were, if the parameters, it's a bit like on a bookcase.
Yeah.
So they are the parameters of the bookcase. How you organise the books is up to you on the bookcase, but you can't put books beyond the width of the bookcase.
Yeah.
Where do we fit individual moral autonomy in that system? Because what I mean by that is, if you are teaching very small children, then you lay clear rules out because they haven't undergone, in a sense, moral formation. As the children get older, inevitably they must be presented with choices, which is part of moral formation. Now, if the choices are made by other people, whether they be scholars or authoritative texts, then is it possible for an individual to grow morally in that because I think there is a difference between moral growth and it's not the same thing as being obedient or submitting to laws. That could potentially be immoral, or at least I look at sort of, I'm not saying that is the situation with in Islam, but I look at, for example, Nazi Germany. There's a very clear sense of, well, I was, the Nuremberg defence. I was simply obeying orders.
Yes.
One of the principal concern for me is people who do not subscribe to the system. Where do they fit? In the sense that the state, one of the other, you talk about the separation of church and state, and I think that was that's a relatively modern concept from the Enlightenment, really, that those two things became separate. And but that was a recognition that the state, in a sense, must stay out of the religious sphere. That the religious sphere is a personal. Religious truths, moral questions are ultimately within the domain of the individual, and it's not the role of the state to legislate for thought or to legislate for morality. And what I'm unsure about, I understand the point of the latitude within the line, but if you look at something like homosexuality, which is beyond the parameters, or non-belief, which is beyond the parameters, or apostasy. I think I'm right in saying this, you will correct me if I'm not.
Yes.
But if they are beyond the parameters, the kind of consensus of scholarly opinion, then where do we sit with those people in a Western society? There's a recognition that legislating for morality doesn't work. Legislating for belief doesn't work. These things come from within a person. They cannot be externally sort of imposed on a person. So
I see the angle. Do you know, earlier on when we started, I said that there is a system the interaction of the human beings
Yeah.
between all the various facets. And now, the issue arises when suddenly, without realizing it, we will be having a conversation and somebody will use certain words and everybody is agreeing, but not necessarily because we understand the import of the words being used. We just commonly think that is what is meant.
Definition is massively important.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, if we look at it, we use two words, in part of the conversation. The word moral and the word immoral. They were used. Now, you look at them and you think, okay, how do we define morality? I'm sure you will have seen, tons of books on what the definition is. Everybody has a different view of what we mean. Now, the question is this, that amongst a plethora of interpretations or definitions, me as an individual, how would I consider X to be the appropriate one for Y? Will that entirely depend on my individual perspective? And if it does, and I decide to use one definition in opposition to the 99 others, okay, should I or could I or can I then determine that any definition in relation to that word ought to only fit my criteria and nobody else's? How would we approach that before we address the second question?
I think that within moral theory, historically people believed they were talking about moral behaviour in terms of the closest approximation to the good, to God, or some platonic ideal of goodness.
Yes.
Moral theory, I think, nowadays is, if you look at sort of public policy, it's focused on what is in, it's almost utilitarian considerations. What measures will bring about the most good for the greatest number of people. It tends not to have a kind of metaphysical dimension. It's a pragmatic decision. What works in the interests of most people. I think that any claims to moral definition that go beyond that are problematic, because absolutist claims in general are difficult to, we say, well, killing is a moral absolute. Sort of Immanuel Kant had very clear ideas on moral absolutes, but in some circumstances it may be necessary to kill a person. In some circumstances it may be necessary to kill to tell a lie to do a greater good. So I think that when I agree about there's around lots of these issues there's an imprecision of thought and thinking, which is always dangerous. But to be too Oscar Wilde, I don't know if you he said something I think is quite powerful. He said, to define is to limit. To define is to limit. And one of the experiences I think that this country is unique, not quite unique. Israel and New Zealand are the other two countries. This country does not have a written codified constitution. And I think there is an analogy with religion here, that there's an acceptance that once we write something down, once we codify it, it then becomes inflexible, it then becomes difficult to change. I think morality in this sense is the same. I can, sort of 60 years ago, homosexuality was a crime. Now it's not. It's something to do, within the Christian tradition, there's the notion, I don't know whether there's an equivalent in Islam, of the sensus fidelium, which means the sense of the faithful. And it's, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's a source of authority, but it certainly feeds into what do the people think. Are you with me? Where do the people stand on this? And that is, in a sense, what as far as morality is concerned, I think it's very difficult for to be have very, very clear definitions, because just because we define something and just because we define it very tightly with philosophical and linguistic precision doesn't mean it's correct.
True.
And morality is something that has its origins, culturally. It's kind of culturally conditioned. It's historically. I know I'm saying it as though I'm a extreme relativist here, but it's very. I'm wary of any. Can I say this, Shabir? Meta kind of narratives where people say, right, this is the truth.
Yeah.
Whether it's Marxism, whatever. It's yeah.
No, I entirely agree with you. The approach I'm looking at here is this. You see, the word morality, again, we delved into. However, if I were to take the position that morality, its definition, its interpretation, is merely a thought process. That thought process then has to somehow be translated into a particular form of action. That action then has to be assessed, and it has to be determined if it has the possibility of becoming a legalistic element. Is my reasoning valid?
Yes, so
it is. But if I were to do that, then there are certain actions which today are common, which are not illegal, as you pointed out. 60 years ago they may have been illegal, but now they are not illegal. But it was possibly based on the idea that we have to look at what is for not only the greater good, but the majority of the people and what they think.
Yes.
Yeah? However, if I take that position, then I would have to also seriously consider, although the details may be a bit different, I would have to seriously consider that if the same thing happened, and you touched on the Nuremberg trials, if the same thing happened in what we call Nazi Germany, the majority of the people, decided that the position that Hitler had taken, possibly, is the right decision.
I'm not saying it's the only source of authority.
Agreed. But on that line of reasoning, if the majority of the people decided, okay, you know what, France is causing us a lot of headache. Let's all collectively agree, let's attack France. From a moral perspective, is there anything wrong with an approach like that?
You are highlighting a sort of an extreme example. I would argue that there's got to be, there's got to be laws. There's got to be rules. There's got to be due process. There's got to be a process that's gone through without which. The problem is if you ascribe to that process an ontological truth that it is not, it is permanently and it's an immutable truth. And that is where you have problems. Not process. If attacking France would be. You look at something like the just war theory, and one of the key principles is proportionality. France might be giving you a big headache. It's not proportional to destroy it. There are human beings create processes and build into those processes mechanisms to against to protect us against. Bad people who might be implementing or seeking to change things, but it's the immutability. That's where issue. Fundamentally, and that at root is the difference, I think, between an Islamic system and a Western legal system,
Yeah.
that the Western legal system is open periodically. There are law commissions, it's open. Now, I recognise that there is scholarship, but fundamentally what contained within Islam is the will of Allah is supreme, is sovereign,
Yeah.
within a liberal mindset, what you might call a Western liberal mindset. The individual is sovereign.
I would possibly take task with that. What I mean by that is, in terms of the supreme will, yes, I'm sure you will know and you are aware that in the United Kingdom, the supreme will is of Parliament.
Sovereignty of Parliament, yes.
Yeah, the sovereignty of Parliament determines. Now, when you said, and rightfully, you said it is the individual, the majority decide on X. They lobby their MPs. The MP raises a question in the Houses of Parliament, and if it is worth considering, a debate will take place and a process will begin. Then, if it is highlighted to be as important as people have made it out to be, there is a possibility that it may pass into law. That's the process, isn't it? Okay. But the question here is, perhaps maybe we have jumped a step. You see, if again it was the will of the people, I'm just using this example a bit further, if it was the will of the people to attack France, despite these safety nets that we have discussed, okay, would it be valid if someone took the position that, look, the majority have decided we attack them, whether there is good reason or not? Because you see, now we are going to have an overlap between what we would call potential danger and a moral perspective. Although, as yet, we have not truly defined what morality is. But we can say that there may be an overlap. Somebody says, they are nice people. If I say a person is a nice person, am I viewing this from a legal perspective or a moral perspective?
Well, it's impossible to know what the person's perspective is. It may be neither. It could just be that the person is agreeable, easy to get along with, affable. But even within, to use the analogy of the British political system, we do not have government by referendum.
Okay.
So the Parliament acts as a filter. The people's views are heard, but they do not determine the policy. Parliament is a kind of sieve, if you will. And I think that is my sort of anxiety, fundamentally, is that people, for whatever reason, whose lives lie outside the system, whose fundamental sort of the person they consider themselves to be, if they are, cannot be part of that system, where do they go, in a sense? Because I think the difficulty is the system. I think it's the fundamental difference between Islam and Christianity. That Christianity has retreated massively from the public sphere into the private sphere. There used to be systemic thinking. Thomas Aquinas, the Summa Theologica, he had something to say about everything. For the reasons that you alluded to. Islam still has that systemic structure, that systemic thinking. And I think that's the sort of fundamental difference, and that's from when you're talking about religion, it is qualitatively different. You're right about the terms. The terms need definition, because Christianity is not a religion in the sense that Islam is. It's not a system of. It once was, and it imposed those beliefs through Inquisition and all sorts of different things. But that is now that's in the historical record, it's no longer the case today. I mean, this is where I'm trying to, within Christian, well, I'm a Christian, this is what people say, I'm a Christian, so therefore it makes sense to me, but I'm not going to impose it on another person.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, my salvation is all I need to worry about, as opposed to creating a theocratic state or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, where the stumbling block that I have, the universal claims of Islam to be definitive and authoritative in all matters. Now that's fine for the people who subscribe to it, but what about the people who don't? And under a different set of circumstances, I could be sitting where you are, Shabir, and you could be sitting where I am.
Absolutely.
And we are ultimately, how capable the human mind is to tap into profound truths, I'm not sure. And the only point I want to make is, if you'd have been born a Christian, would you be marshalling these arguments? I know you probably say you would have converted, but you would probably be marshalling with the same logical precision arguments in favour of Christianity. And I think that is, we're all, in a sense, accidents of birth. We're all parts. Well, I use that term loosely, but we're all born into a particular family, into a particular set of circumstances, and that socialisation. Now, I know your history is an interesting one, but my issue is the projection from personal belief onto public space. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Of course, I understand.
That's my worry. Whether we're projecting a definition of morality,
whatever it is,
religion, what's that? Yes.
Yeah, I entirely agree with you. However, if we look at Islam, and the example you gave of a bookcase, now, I referred to a particular statement in the Quran where it talks about how this day have we perfected your way for you and given you al-Islam as a favor. Now, if I look at this particular statement just on its own, I'll think to myself, okay, it said this day have I perfected. Okay, we have definitions, okay. A system seems to be being referred to, Now, either the system is going to be in totality comprehensive, to make sense, or the claim that is being made is partial. And if that is the case, then it is partial guidance, logically to its conclusion. But that won't work, because you either tell me, okay, you know what, I have got the system here, or, well, it's sort of a system, do what you can, the best of it, okay? Now, if I were to view this from the angle that we are discussing, I have got X, one person, a group of persons, a country, and the world. Now, if I, as a normal human being, whatever that is, okay, is going to view it, and I think to myself, you know what, I would like for my brothers here, sat, Stephen, I'm sorry brother, Fayaz, Muhammad Ali, whatever I want for myself, I would love for them to have the same. Okay. Now, if I restrict it to this room, am I perhaps being selfish to that extent and not including the next door neighbor? But if I say that, and I say, right, wait a minute, why am I stopping at the next door neighbor? Why can't I go to the end of the street? My thinking still is valid, but now the amount of personal effort that I will have to put in is now getting bigger and bigger and bigger, to the extent that somewhere along the line, I will not be able to go beyond that. But the thought is still there, that I want to help the guys at the end of the street. Nay, in fact, I want to help everybody in the world. Now, if a person genuinely is thinking about holding a position where everything that he considers or she considers to be good ought to be applied to everybody in the world, would you consider that to be a supreme thought? Not an absolute one, because by definition we are limited individuals, but a supreme thought, where I am thinking, look, I want goodness, the way we are looking at goodness, to pervade the whole of the world. Now, if I start that position and I think, right, now how am I going to define certain things? How am I going to define rules which will be beneficial for the whole of humanity? As individuals, it's a no-no automatic. We know we can't do it by definition, okay? Now, if we look at the, as you touched on it, this metaphysical aspect, okay? There's the presuppositional argument, okay? Just leave it aside for a moment and think this. I want everybody to have the best of whatever is available. For me to be able to define all this, I would need to know what I'm saying. If I say, okay, drinking Coca-Cola is good, but drinking Coca-Cola is better, that is purely subjective. Yeah, it is only me saying it. Okay. Now, if I want to transcend personal thoughts and have a system that will be of benefit to humanity, how can I do that? Now, this will touch on, the issues you talked about as a person, okay, and the state. The state legislates certain actions to be criminal. The state legislates certain actions to be in the area of civil litigation, okay? This is what we have in the United Kingdom. But whatever has been defined as a criminal offense, whether we like it or not, whether we agree with it or not, the law is the law. Yeah, we can't even plead ignorance. Okay, you can have in mitigation, but you can't plead ignorance about the law. The law is the law, whether we like it or not, as Peter Sellers famously always said. Yeah, but the point is this. Now, we had, as an example, homosexuality, which was a criminal offense. But in 1967, that changed.
Yes.
No problem. We had adultery as a criminal offense, which was changed. But the remnants still remain. So we have got one of the 5 reasons of divorce in a United Kingdom court. One of them is adultery. It is still, the remnants are there.
Yes.
But the question is this. Adultery itself, before we move on to these others also, yeah, if we look at adultery, the thought of adultery, is it a criminal offense? If on a general level we look at it, is it a criminal offense? No. Even when it was a criminal offense, just the mere thinking is not a criminal offense. How it is viewed in a court of law, for example, murder, kill someone, okay? The courts have developed this legalistic interpretation of certain criminal offenses, and they've introduced certain views which were not there before. So if somebody is killed, okay, for it to be defined as murder, they would have to consider whether the intent to kill was there. Now, the intent seems to be bordering on what we would consider to be subjective. Yeah, was there an intent to kill the person? Yeah, perhaps there wasn't an intent. It just happened. We would then not call it murder.
Yes.
It would switch to something else. Yes. If somebody in a fit of anger suddenly walks through, happily with a bunch of flowers in his hands, he walks through the door to present to his wife, opens the door and she's in bed with somebody else. He flips, gets the nearest knife or whatever and kills them both. Would that be murder? If it went into a court of law, they would consider all the evidence. They would come and think, well, wait a minute, if there was intent, it would have been premeditated, but it seems it was not premeditated. He just turned up, he saw this in a fit of rage, blah, blah. Maybe diminished responsibility, but it certainly will not be classified as murder. It would go on to manslaughter. But these were rules over many, many years that were developed. Why? because certain what we would consider novel situations arose, and on that basis they were addressed. But once they were addressed, it was either made into law or it was not. The point here is this, that if, as an example, adultery, its definition, although nowadays it seems to be disappearing in the mists of time as I consider it, adultery was defined as the penetration of a male into a female. Two people who were not related through marriage. That is still the definition today. But it seems to have expanded because there are other relationships which now have come into vogue, which have to be considered. And also certain forms of gender issues which have arisen, which had to be addressed. Okay? So you look at all this and you think, wait a minute, if I am looking at each issue, okay, I either will fall into confusion or I'll become ignorant of what is going on. The problem with being ignorant is that if I view a certain action and I was taught from young that that certain action is to be vilified, yes, is to be abhorred, then my view is going to be exactly that. My ignorance sometimes is going to make me do something against somebody who may be entirely innocent, but I only did it based on what I thought was true. Hence the very idea and a logical progression of the need for a rule of law.
I understand that, but the point about the law in this country, that you've already alluded to, is the law only legislates for what it legislates for. And that's, in a sense, it's like the tide retreating, the tide going out. It legislates now for much. It doesn't legislate for morality anymore. Okay, so even marriage and all of those things, you know, the law says now that 2 women can marry or 2 men. That's the legal. The law. What the law is based on, a sort of. It's a pragmatic, contractual kind of arrangement. What is in the best interest for all of these people living together? How do we govern peaceably? And the law doesn't have any higher claims than that. Arguments that in the 19th, 18th, 19th centuries that law was somehow based in you know, the natural law, divine law, had some origin in those things. You'll probably be aware of the famous debate between Herbert Hart and Patrick Devlin about Devlin wrote a very famous book called The Enforcement of Morals. He saw the law as the embodiment. The purpose of law was to enforce moral truths. That's his view. Devlin argued that, Hart argued that law, the purpose of law, there's no higher end to law. What law is it's a positivist view. A law is a law if it has been through these processes and it's applied in this way. And the point I'm trying to make, linking back to what I think are you seeking to develop an analogy between Sharia? I sense that that's the direction in which you're going. That human beings have laws. We say in this country, you can't do this, you can't do that. And you know, when you talk about logical progression, I think you're going to use this as some sort of analogy for Sharia. But I think the two are grounded in different. They have a different source. The source for Sharia comes from
the divine will.
The source for human law comes from
human beings.
Now, the thing, one of the things when you talk about subjectivity, you have a truth for you has been when you talk about that particular passage in the Quran, and you want to share it with us.
What?
You're on Facebook, so
independent.
Share it with the people who live here. But Shabir, the Marxist, has exactly the same evangelical zeal. Are you with me? Because he believes that his worldview, his system, his understanding of the relationships between politics and economics that if it was only like I want it to be like, if we had a sort of a proletarian revolution and we had the working class ruled, then the whole of the world would be a much better place.
Yeah.
The environmentalists have the same. If we shift economy, that's becomes subordinate to the environment. The Christian, Judaism's not particularly proselytizing, but Christianity, the elements of Christianity are where I understand. Have you have looked at some of Thomas Aquinas' writings? What Thomas Aquinas developed the kind of dialectical reasoning, in a sense, that he looked at. This is the proposition. These are all the counter arguments, and now I'll reach a judgment on the basis of using reason. His reason just so happened to conform to his beliefs.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difficulty.
Yeah.
Do you understand?
I see exactly what you mean.
Within the scientific,
yes.
but I'm not even sure whether methodologically it's true in science. Whether when we talk about reasoning, we assume that the arguments sort of come first, and then on the basis of the arguments we reach the conclusion.
Absolutely.
Which arguments have the great? Now, I think within the human mind, it's sort of, in a kind of a priori sense, you believe Islam to be true, and I respect you. Tremendously for that. So and I'm not suggesting intellectual dishonesty at all. I'm not suggesting that.
I know.
It's a natural thing. What we do is we then construct, because you're literate in a whole range of fields. I can see that. But we, in a sense, we construct the arguments after the conclusion, not prior to the conclusion. So if I can just use this as an analogy, when Marx wrote Das Kapital, he then saw history through the prism of his theory. So he sees at different points, so that's a slave rebellion, that's the beginnings of class consciousness. This is, he begins,
absolutely, I agree with you.
And I think that's the danger because what we want to be within us, I look at it in scientific research. Somebody, the top chairs in science in the universities across this country, somebody somewhere's funding those chairs. There's an old saying, "He who pays the piper calls the tune." The idea that scientific research is completely objective, evidence-led, I dispute that. I question that. But I think this is a problem. We all have, Mohammed, you're married, your wife is the most beautiful woman to you. I'm sure that's true.
Calling.
That's a very subjective view. For him, it's absolutely true. But I'm struggling to get beyond that in terms of religion, because I think ultimately it is subjective, and therefore, even if it makes complete rational sense to you, a different set of propositions make completely rational sense to me, and that's my argument for why fundamentally the historical kind of trajectory of the West has got so many things wrong, but I think what it has got right is we withdraw from the realm of religion. Now in France, that's had a very negative impact, because the idea of the laïcité in France is a very aggressive form of secularism. So there's been issues with what they call the burkini, hasn't there, and this sort of thing in Nice. And Britain seems to do it better. We're not going. So you talk, Mohammed, about your daughter being in an Islamic school. It's wonderful we have Islamic schools in this country. We have Jewish schools. We have Christian schools. We have pluralism. We have toleration. We have something. We are not systemic in our approach to politics, in our approach to public policy, because the French are more systemic. more codified, more logical. Therefore, within their mind, secularism is a fundamental plank of French national identity. There can be no room for religion.
Yeah.
We've not gone down that route.
Yeah.
Now, the point I'm trying to, what I want to say
Yes.
is, it's perfectly legitimate for you to walk and knock on every door of this street and to, can I use the word evangelise, proselytise, whatever, different people. That's a wonderful thing. That's living in a free country. So the Anjem Chowdhury was able to do an awful lot until they caught him.
By law.
Yes, but he was hitherto he'd been able to do some protests that people thought offensive or whatever, and he remained on the right. I think he had a legal background.
Yes.
He remained on the right side of the law. Now, the point that I'm trying to make is that in a polity